Right now, you can get a hit of pleasure in seconds. Scroll a feed, eat a piece of chocolate, play a song you love. Dopamine floods your brain before you even realize it's happening. But for almost the entire stretch of human history, none of that existed. No sugar on demand. No music at your fingertips. No screen to swipe. So what did ancient humans actually do when they wanted to feel good? The answer is stranger, deeper, and more revealing than you might expect. Let's start with the most obvious one: food, but not in the way you're thinking. For most of human history, food wasn't something you reached into a cabinet to grab. It was something you chased, dug for, climbed for, and sometimes nearly died trying to get. And precisely because of that, the pleasure of eating was almost incomprehensibly intense compared to what we experience today. Neuroscientists know that dopamine isn't really about pleasure itself. It's about anticipation, the chase, the reward after effort. When a hunter-gatherer tracked an animal for 6 hours through the bush and finally made the kill, the dopamine release wasn't just about eating. It was the culmination of hours of focused pursuit. The brain was flooded in a way that a person opening a refrigerator will never experience. But here's what's even more interesting. Ancient humans had one flavor that was almost impossible to find, and that their brains were specifically wired to crave above almost everything else. Sugar, natural sugar, ripe fruit, wild honey. And these weren't everyday foods. They were rare, seasonal, and finding them was an event. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer groups have documented that the discovery of a wild beehive is treated almost like a celebration. People travel long distances. They risk stings. They share the honey with the entire group. The experience of tasting something intensely sweet in a world that was mostly bitter, sour, and savory was a neurological explosion. Your ancestors didn't eat dessert every day. They ate it maybe a handful of times a year, and when they did, it meant something. Then there was music, and this one might surprise you. Humans have been making music for at least 40,000 years. We know this because we found the instruments. Flutes carved from vulture bone and mammoth ivory, discovered in caves in Germany, date back to the Upper Paleolithic period. These weren't accidental objects. They were crafted with precision and care by people who understood acoustics well enough to produce specific tones. Music wasn't a modern invention. It was one of the first things humans did with their free time. But ancient music wasn't something you listened to passively. You participated, you drummed, you sang, you moved your body. Rhythm, specifically, does something profound to the human brain. Synchronized movement with other people, whether drumming, dancing, or chanting together, releases endorphins in a way that solo activity simply doesn't. Researchers studying this phenomenon call it muscular bonding, and it produces a measurable increase in pain tolerance and feelings of social connection. Ancient humans weren't just playing music for fun. They were chemically binding themselves to each other through shared rhythm. It was pleasure and social glue at the same time. And speaking of social connection, let's talk about something that often gets overlooked: grooming. Every primate on the planet does it. Chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas. They spend enormous amounts of time picking through each other's fur, removing parasites, touching, and for a long time, scientists assumed this was purely hygienic. But that's not the whole story. Social grooming triggers the release of oxytocin and endorphins in both the giver and the receiver. It reduces cortisol, the stress hormone. It creates trust between individuals in a way that almost nothing else can. For early humans, sitting together and grooming was one of the primary ways pleasure and social bonding happened at the same time. We don't pick through each other's hair anymore, obviously, but we didn't fully abandon the instinct. We just transformed it. The gentle, repetitive physical contact of grooming became haircuts, massages, the casual arm around a shoulder. The pleasure that ancient humans got from an hour of social grooming, we now chase through 100 different substitutes, most of them far less effective. Now, here's one that's going to reframe something you think you understand. Play. Modern culture tends to think of play as something children do, adults work. But for the vast majority of human history, that line didn't exist. Hunter-gatherer societies have been observed spending between 4 and 6 hours per day in leisure activity. Not survival, not labor, leisure, games, jokes, competitive physical challenges, storytelling contests. The anthropologist Marshall Solins famously called hunter-gatherers the original affluent society, not because they had a lot of stuff, but because they had an enormous amount of free time and used it for pleasure. Children and adults played together, racing, wrestling, games of skill and chance, throwing competitions, hunting games that doubled as training. And here's what's important. These activities weren't just fun. They were delivering constant, meaningful doses of dopamine, adrenaline, and social reward in a completely natural, sustainable way. The pleasure system wasn't being hacked. It was being used exactly as it was designed. Compare that to now. The average adult in a modern, industrialized country reports feeling like they don't have enough time for leisure. We work longer hours, commute, manage endless notifications, and then try to recover by consuming entertainment rather than participating in it. Watching sports instead of playing them. Watching cooking videos instead of cooking. The pleasure is real, but it's shallower. It's received rather than earned. Let's talk about one more source of ancient pleasure that we've almost entirely erased from modern life. Nature itself. This sounds simple, almost obvious, but the science behind it is anything but. Research from the fields of environmental psychology and cognitive neuroscience has consistently found that exposure to natural environments, forests, open water, grasslands, produces measurable reductions in cortisol, measurable increases in serotonin, and activates a distinct mode of attention that researchers call soft fascination. It's a relaxed, effortless state of awareness that the brain slips into when it's surrounded by natural patterns. The sound of moving water, the shifting of light through leaves, the horizon stretching out flat and open. For ancient humans, this wasn't therapy. It was just Tuesday. Their entire lives were spent inside the sensory environment that the human brain had evolved over millions of years to find calming and pleasurable. The sounds, the smells, the textures, everything their nervous system was calibrated to receive. Modern humans have to plan a vacation to get a few days of that. And studies show that it takes about 3 full days in nature before the modern brain fully shifts out of its high alert, stimulus-overloaded state. 3 days just to arrive at the baseline that our ancestors lived in permanently. So what does all of this tell us? Ancient humans weren't suffering through joyless lives of pure survival. They were experiencing pleasure constantly, but in ways that were earned, embodied, shared, and deeply wired into their biology. The pleasure of food came after effort. The pleasure of music came from participation. The pleasure of touch came from genuine social bonds. The pleasure of rest came at the end of real physical exertion. Every reward had a cost, and the cost is what made the reward mean something neurologically. What we've done in the modern world is figure out how to deliver the reward without the cost. Add hyper-palatable food engineered to hit every pleasure receptor simultaneously. Entertainment designed to hold attention without requiring any effort. Social media that simulates connection without the vulnerability of real contact. And every single one of these shortcuts works. They do produce pleasure, but they do it by flooding a system that was built for a very different world. A system that was calibrated for effort, patience, and genuine human contact. The ancient human who found a beehive after a long day of walking was experiencing something that most modern people will never feel in their entire lives. Not because they were wiser or more spiritual, but because they lived in a world that made them work for it. And the work was the point. The work was the pleasure. We didn't just change how we seek pleasure. We changed what pleasure means. And somewhere underneath all the light and noise and instant gratification, the ancient version of you is still waiting. Still built for the chase. Still wired for the fire, the drum, the ripe fruit found at the end of a long walk through the wild. Still expecting, on some level, to earn it.